Robinson, and this is going to be episode 2 of Mystery Occultism. In our last video, we went over the ideas relating to my awakening, how I got there, and then we covered briefly the nature of the occult, what it is, what it actually is, and what it's not, and the kind of information that was held and served for only those initiated into that tradition, or any of the traditions. Though truly there was actually one tradition within the different cultural manifestations. So today I would like to elaborate and follow up on that last video by going into what the occult mystery tradition is specifically, and cover the ones from Antiquity and how far it goes back, the methods of teaching, and as well as at least go over several of the different unique ones from Antiquity itself, spanning many cultures. So, to just know what the occult is, you actually also must know what the tradition is and what it contained, and how far back into history you can trace it. Well, according to some, you can trace the earliest inception that we can find of the mystery tradition from the Atlanteans and the last remnants of their culture that pretty much escaped the collapse, going in all different directions, which is why you find many of the same stories in all areas surrounding the different continents, east and west of where they've been, in the Azores Mountains. You find America, you find Central America, you find Europe, you find Africa. Basically they split in all directions. When you escape the city of Atlantis, go to the British Republic about 11,000 years ago. So, these priestly and occult remedies that spread out and fan the globe simply to reconstitute and preserve the knowledge that they had already received or acquired through their schools over a golden age of Atlantean culture that had obviously become Jack Midland used to and fell due to their foibles and their flaws and abuse of this knowledge. But it was too important to leave to chance, so they went to various places, set up new cultures in Egypt and Sumeria and Central America. You find in all these places you find the same story of weird, white, large people coming on ships, half the time with blonde hair, so typically not looking like the cultures that they arrived at. And they all have this story. They arrived with information and knowledge of the stars, astrology, agriculture, and reading and writing, and taught the people that were there this information of these fields of inquiry and cultural necessities for advancing a sophisticated culture. So, in each one of these places, essentially, there was instituted a form of the religion mystery tradition of Atlantis. In Egypt, you had Thoth, basically coming as the deity of magic, they refer to as, and founding it in Egypt, which is easily traceable, and was a wonderful tradition, with much meaning in a long history after its new founding. But you also had it in other places as well, and that skipped around and manifested after histories, civilizations fell into darkness over and over again due to certain disasters, basically, where we see blackouts in the historical record when it seems to come back out of nowhere. In Egypt and Greece, and Rome, and you have Alexandria, and again, the Gnostics. So, it's reiterated multiple times, depending on circumstances and the dark ages that seemingly and almost invariably reoccur from various factors. So, the occult mystery tradition from Atlantis is essentially a primal set of doctrines relating to the stuff I mentioned in the previous video about cosmology and the nature of reality, about its various levels of manifestation and intensification, and also relating to our deeper and more spiritual, psychological processes that are latent in most of us, which we're totally aware of most of the time, as well as the various vehicles or principles that make up our sevenfold being that most of us have no idea about except for the physical one. And all this is taught in these traditions, whether it's Eleusis or Mithraism or the Odinic mysteries or the Orphic mysteries or the Isis mysteries of Egypt or the ones of Tammuz and Ishtar and Sumeria and Babylon. And each one had its own relation based on culture, but essentially related the same concepts in symbolic form. Typically, in the ancient world, how this would be taught, esoterically and exoterically, would be very similar. But only the real meaning would be given to the initiated during various, yearly and zodiacally related initiation rituals that have been basically cultural rites that were repeated during the equinoxes or solstices, where new neophytes would become initiated into the different spiritual parts. Esoterically and exoterically would be very similar, but only the real meaning would be given to the initiated during various, yearly and zodiacally related initiation rituals that have been basically cultural rites that were repeated during the equinoxes or solstices, where new neophytes would become initiated into the different spiritual parts. Like there's a lesser and a greater mysteries. Obviously, you have to go through the lesser ones first, and the greater ones are reserved for later, years later. Also, they had to go through many trials and tribulations that could be extremely dangerous to test not only the capabilities of the individuals being initiated, but also very importantly tested their moral character, integrity, and their trustworthiness, whether they were truly ready and able to be a guardian of the tradition, its information, and not break their oaths, which they all have to take oaths, to not, reveal this information to people at large who were not ready for this information, which, on a side note, I think we are definitely ready, and it's an absolute necessity, which is part of this podcast, because we look forward to engage in this form of esoteric secrecy that needs this information. We are at a crisis point in the materialistic culture, just saturated materialism and scientism, essentially. And they didn't have that problem, obviously, particularly. They had a very different type of consciousness and way of thinking about things regarding themselves, in relation to the cosmos and the divine. And they didn't focus so much on, for lack of a better term, on matter itself, on this just physical plane. They thought about other things. And some of them killed very morally interactive after the initiated. So, the mystery tradition in Antiquity took many forms. One of the most unique ones, that's kind of in the middling period, right around probably 400 say 200 BC, all the way up to destruction of Rome in 400 AD, was the Gnostics, which also had iterations across various parts of the globe. There's Mandaeism, Manichaeism, Valentinian, Saturnism, or even some say Hermeticism was one as well. And they actually have a quite good narratives and cosmological renditions that are different than some of the other traditions. But I will go over those in a different podcast because they kind of need to cover it all together because it's a big category, kind of all by itself. And obviously fascinating. And we didn't know a whole lot until 1945 when Nagamani text came out in Egypt. It was discovered in clay jars, tablets, right at the end of World War II and after the Dead Sea Scrolls. And before that, all we had were the accounts of one of their opponents, Iranians, who was part of the early clergy of Christianity that hated the Gnostics, but in his weird way rendered their doctrines pretty much in great detail because he thought their concepts were so absurd that they needed to be fully elaborated to show how absurd we thought they were. So we had the Against the Heresies by Irenaeus, and then books like Pistis of Fire, and maybe a few others. None a lot. Nagamani expanded that into its fragmentary. But to go back to the other traditions that I'd like to cover today, we have, these mythologies that were presented to everybody in the populace of whatever civilization, whether it's ancient Iran, Persia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Babylon, in any of these cultures, you had the exoteric and esoteric version of mythology. Running basically the same, except for their meaning. For the average person, it was a god mythology of different gods and pretty much all their adventures. And having your starting the basics, like you have Odin, or Zeus, or Isis, or Ra, and then they would relay these rather, obviously pretty simple mythological stories related to each god and very different rivalries and who was a son and a daughter, just the first god down to their children and their children's children. And essentially it became much like just the basic epic story, or almost like a fantasy story. But what do they teach those that were initiated? What was so different about this occult version that was reserved for these ancient adepts and initiates? And why was it kept hidden, so to speak? And why was it only related to those who could essentially go through extreme trials and tribulations of moral fortitude, physical fortitude, psychic fortitude, and determination of their real trustworthiness to keep it hidden from everybody else, since it was essentially a sacred duty to keep it if you actually got to be an issue, the lesser or even the greater mystery. So, what made these mythologies different for them, and this was fascinating to think about it, was the idea that all these various gods, whatever culture, were never really meant to be seen as essentially big humans or powerful humans that had special abilities or powers over certain things, and were put into these almost fantasy-like stories. And people today think it was just essentially for people's entertainment, and that these religions were not much else but stories. I guess created out of their imagination for no other reason that they can do so, which seems pretty odd to me, but that's what we're learning, and that's what's taught, and I guess I bought it. But in the actual cold mystery schools, they laid a very different comprehensive meaning to these stories and these gods and what they represent, which was essentially their personifications and anthropomorphications of celestial and cosmic forces. So they represent force or an idea or a concept. And when they interacted with other gods, this would be the interaction of forces, not actually beings that were people. So, cosmic electricity, the stimulated force, the original god, which would be similar to Kepler, the first Sephiroth in Kabbalah, or, Parabrahma in the Eastern occultism, or the Logos in Western occultism, whichever you prefer. But the first cause, the original God, not the infinite manifest, the one that's behind all reality, but the first God manifesting inside, which is a stimulating force, one that simply resides as a potentiality for universal creation of cosmos during that period. And the various sons and daughters or wives would represent the complementary forces needed for cosmic unfolding in each culture. So they were never meant to be seen as just stories of very interesting, advanced or specially skilled divine beings that essentially went through daily activities not much different than humanity, but on a bigger scale and a grander scale. They were really the reduction of archetypal forces into personified forms or narration. And to the elites of these schools, they were relayed and revealed to them the real meanings behind these seemingly normal gods. Zeus was not simply Zeus. He was the personification of the one. He was cosmic potentiality. He was the electrifying force of whose lightning bolts. It's how, Saturn creates him. And Saturn always eats his own children, which is another interesting story. Never meant to be about cannibalism or some sick, mental perturbation of a jealous god who would be usurped by his son, who would be more powerful. What this really referred to in the cultural sense was Saturn is the original root essence. And when he eats his own children, this is the idea of absorption. Reabsorption is the next cycle, which takes place over almost inconceivable amount of time. The Eastern occultists call it a cycle of Brahma, the day of Brahma, and the night of Brahma. And the full day takes place over 211 trillion years, an inconceivable amount of time. And at the end of that period, everything is reabsorbed into the original, or the first cause, which is Brahma, and then that first deity that's created, the very first thing creation, is then also reabsorbed back into the eternal absolute essence, referred to as Parabrahma, which they say is the only real thing. So essentially, Saturn would be akin to that, or in some versions, it would be Uranus. Uranus, with God being the female potency, or the principle, the negative, and then the male being positive, which the reason they always do both is because that's a system required for manifestation to occur. You cannot bring reality into reality without equilibrium, which requires opposition forces. negatives and positives, yin and yangs, male and female. So this is why that's always pretty much rendered that way with a couple, a divine couple that grades up. It doesn't matter what culture it was. And this divine couple then manifests through childbirth the different forces that unfold reality along less rarefied planes of existence, more dense, and represent the forces that are used, well, not used, but put into effect to unfold and differentiate the two main blueprint forces, the original male and female, and unfold those even more forces. So that by the time you get to humanity, it is an enormous schematic and cosmic scheme that is extremely difficult to render a few words or even a few bucks being one of the most sophisticated and complex cosmologies that you'll ever encounter. When you discovered the secret doctrine of both cosmic genesis by Blavatsky, it's 200 pages of one schematic explaining the nature of reality from the first to the last. And it's long and very complex. So, what they learned, and what the purpose of this mystery tradition, that went back to Atlantis, and then was reiterated throughout all the cultures by the survivors of the Ezekiel, was this knowledge of the cosmos related to stories, which were really stories of archetypes and celestial forces used to unfold reality, as well as to work with reality in terms of aiding cosmic unfoldment from where we are in our current period by working along the same lines that the cosmic forces that have already unfolded, the channels to go through could be basically reopened or discovered, and energy can be brought down from the one into creation and used to harmonize humanity as well as, in some cases, reality on our planet. And this is several of the important things that were guarded by the mystery traditions of Antiquity, as well as the nature and relationship that humanity has to these higher beings, forces, where we fit into the higher, and why we exist, which brings on our technically 10th hierarchy of angels, but that's just one school of thought. That is the Rosicrucian and Philosophical school, which was not ancient. Those were more modern iterations of older schools. So, the Druidic mysteries, and the Odinic mysteries, and the Orphic mysteries, and the Salem mysteries, and the Zoroastrian, and the Vedic, and Egyptian, and Babylonian, all had negative and positive archetypal forces represented by male and female gods that are the original projectors of reality and sometimes mankind itself, which is one way to depict it that the masses will never figure out without the appropriate knowledge. Otherwise, it's just such simple stories, fascinating, but not much more. And that's how they remain, for the most part, even considered today by people that study anthropology, ancient history, ancient philosophy, ancient mythology, comparative religion. Many today in academia still retain pretty much that same mindset and perspective regarding these traditions, unless they study them a little deeper. We tend to think that we're superior in our time period and that we've advanced, and thus, of course, their stories were just superstitious nonsense to the modern mind, used by each of them to entertain themselves. And they form religions, which belies the idea that they may have actually had most deeper concepts embedded within these traditions that aren't obvious, hidden in plain sight, as they would say, which they did, and which are very interesting. Let's take one example. Mentioned in Manly B. Hall's book, there's a story about, I think it's Isis. It's either Isis or Ishtar. And the story goes, in this part of their mythology, that her husband had been killed and sent to the underworld, and thus the queen of the gods desired to go and retrieve the soul and bring it back and essentially reconstitute their husband and highest god. So what does she do? Well, she has to go through 7 trials and take off 7 layers of her attire on the way down the underworld before she reascends and requires all those very same accessories or parts of her outfit that she had to relinquish on the way down to receive her husband's soul and bring it back out. So ostensibly this just sounds like a rescue story of the Queen of the Gods, pretty much having to undergo a humbling experience on each layer, which there are 7, according to the story, on the way to the bottom of the underworld, which I can't exactly remember who tells her she has to take these things off on each layer, but it's pretty much a requirement, and it's done. And then she requires them on the way out per layer. So each layer back up, she gets the same thing back on the way out. So, if you go through the normal version, it's pretty basic story. But in mystery traditions, this is the totally different sequence. She represents mankind, going through 7 layers of the out before they become fully sold. And the bottom of the underworld, where she's trying to receive the soul of her husband back, is actually the nadir, or the lowest and densest point of the material world, the underworld, where we are, essentially, at this time period. We're at the most physical part of the universe, which they all are independent to, so it's not like one's higher or lower than we are in physical space. It's just less visible, essentially vibrating at a rate that we can't see with our eyes, and it's all around us. Regardless, Isis would represent humans, our human evolution from a spiritual state into a fully materialized state. And along the way, we would have to give up our divine 7 principles, which are basically the vehicles that make up our entire being. You have the physical body, you have the etheric body, or the vital body, you have the astral body, you have the light principle, you have the mind body, mental body, which in some schools makes up 2 different aspects. There's a higher and lower, but for today we'll just talk about it as one body, the fifth, the mental body, the minus, the least. And then you have the spiritual soul, or Buddhi, B-U-D-H-I, and the East. And then you have your spirit, your divine spark, your eternal essence, which is the 7th principle, or the first principle, however you look at it, which is called Atma. So it's not that these principles are relinquished, or given up on the way down in the matter. It's that they essentially become void and unknown to the soul person, which would be Isis in the story. And it goes through 7 stages, which in cosmology, it does 7 stages as well, whichever school you look at. So, the interesting part is that on the way out, after essentially completing the mission, getting down to the lowest part of the underworld, she receives her husband's soul, bring it back out, and it ascends out of the underworld through the same 7 layers. So that part of the narrative relates to our spiritual evolution on the other side, our reascension, our requirement, unfolding of the full potential and reawakening latencies of those bodies, where we fully master them and acknowledge them and have them vibrating at their highest rates, which go through 7 periods, and there are 7 cosmology periods, which are called the recent sun schools of thought, like the Rosicrucianism. It is the Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth, Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan periods, or in the Earth period, which are very long epics of unfoldment for the monadic souls that are incarnating over and over again and becoming evolved and gaining experience. We haven't gone through the last 3 stages, but essentially in this story, the 7-staged reascension represents that. And you never know it based on the word-for-word rendition of the narrative. Isis thus reascends, and thus we reascend, and we acquire knowledge of all those bodies which are represented by her time, or necklace. I think it's like the necklaces and rings that she covets, that she gets back on the way out. So, if you look at it exactly verbatim, this is nothing but a simple story, but we explained it as representative and symbolic forms of human evolution and incarnation, and our full path from involution down from spirit to matter, and then from matter back up to spirit again. It's pretty much all there, just hidden under the various forms of terminology and cultural mythos of Isis and Osiris. And this is how they hide information and then leave under initiation. It's very easy to do, and you never figure it out. Ever. You've done something. And on top of these types of narrative, symbolic, how do you inside types of information, you also have even more abstract methods that they use for information across time, not just initiation, which would be the occult symbols that they used, which a lot of them were the same, and I'm pretty much universal in a lot of places. I don't want to bring it up, but it's so ancient, you just have to. You know what people think of the symbol. The ancient swastika of Buddhism, which far predates Nazis. It isn't actually the same symbol. One's going one way, and one's going the other way. It is all over the ancient world. It's not Japan, India, all sorts of random places on certain monuments dating back 5,000 years. The swastika was an ancient symbol, a sacred symbol, considered holy, and considered representative of very unique knowledge and cosmic forces that are essential to the universe. So how do they do this? How do they take such a simple, seeming simple, bit of interconnecting lines and circles to render this into a whole information that can be unfolded into a lot of knowledge related to the cosmos? Well, it's very fascinating. And when you see how it works, you can see what the line and various uses of, I'm going to say sacred geometry. Symbolic archetypes, how they use these symbolic archetypes to represent vast concepts. It makes sense that it would be able to be reinterpreted later on. If they say, got wiped out and destroyed, or at least dead as the destruction. The fall of the Christian Crusades, pagans. Symbols were not destroyed, but the knowledge was lost for a long time. You never really meant. Once these people died, new. So what is the swastika? What's its relevance? And where does it derive? Where does it derive from? Well, like most things, it still goes back a little further, and that's one of the later, maybe the third part of the symbol line, if you want to start later and depicting symbols that relate to reality as it unfolds. So what's the first symbol? Well, they call it space, which would be a blank piece of paper with a circle on it. And then say that circle, which is the lazy circle, is the only adequate symbol to represent the infinite, eternal, absolute essence that's never manifested. Saying that the circle is essentially the deity, the ancient, eternal principle that is termed a circle that has a circumference that is everywhere. Its boundaries extends to all the out, but its center is nowhere. Or sorry. Its circumference is nowhere, and its center is everywhere. Thus, being the absolute. Nothing is outside of it, and it is in every space in atom of the entire existence. Permanent. It is its foundation. It is its structural framework. There is no way to not be inside of it. Permanence everything. You are living within the being. It is all things. It is everything at all times. There is nothing but it. It is the all, as they say, the one, and the absolute. So, the circle represents the absolute. Next one, which represents the first manifestation, after that, pretty much a crystallization by this one principle. It concentrates a center of itself, within itself. That becomes the temporal God, the one God for that period of cosmic activity, or day of Brahmanas. And that symbol is a circle of the dot, right in the middle. Pretty basic, but it definitely represents the idea of a circle that then concentrates the center, which is exactly what they're trying to relay their initiation. That is the symbol for the logos, the first cause, how do we determine it? Following that, they have the second part of cosmology and the symbolic representation of it by a circle of line, just a line straight in the middle. And this pretty much represents the active, stimulatory, and male principle after the first cause is basically crystallized. That in the first cause is essentially a cosmic potentiality. It's neither active nor passive. It just kind of rests in its own being as the possibility of everything that hasn't happened yet. But it's a manifestation. It's in reality. It's not behind it. But it isn't unfolding. Not yet. And when the dots turn into a line, this is the actual initiation, beginning of a cosmic period of differentiation. This is the stimulating force. This is the altitude of that potential into a stream of positive male and upbuilding energy, or Hotma, which is simply just rendered as a circle with a line. It's pretty amazing when you start studying this and just how it can easily be conveyed in that way. You start putting your circles and lines, showing the forces and ideas related to them that you're reading about, and it all starts to kind of click at a certain point. You think of how reductionist that is, but how easily it does render the idea solidly encased in these archetypal symbols that are everywhere. And very seemingly and seems basic, but can basically be picked up again by people that have enough knowledge in the future to reacquire the same information that was lost, or simply just forgotten, residing all over minds in the world. After that, you have the symbol of the cross on the circle, which would be two intersecting lines, which is male and female, positive and negative. The original circle of the cross, which is the cross fertilization of force and form, Kabbalah, and the male and female deities, and also the negative and positive and yang forces that then form a stabilized, equalized, and equilibrated type of manifestation at the beginning of differentiation into a whole rock cosmos. But bear in mind, this is not a materialized time period. This is so rarefied that it's very hard to form a proper concept of. Some of the best ways to think about it is as the creation of archetypal blueprints that things will eventually materialize around on down the scheme. So, as an architect, you don't build the house, you have to draw the house first. Same thing. Without a blueprint of how the forces need to interact and how they'll become encased in forms that are stable. A blueprint and an archetype and the schematic have to be generated first. And that's what happens in the beginning, when the first interaction of the forces coalesce, becoming a stabilized trinity with the original first cause and the male and females forces that stem from it. It's essentially a yin and yang in repose, and then it unfolds and differentiates into the yang, while still being one entity, and they call that the triune being, or the trinity. And that's the line intersecting another line in the circle. So simple, yet so adequate to relay information. And then we get to where we began with this part of this conversation, the podcast, is swastika. What does that mean? That's the next symbol. And that is simply the same one as the two lines in the middle of the circle, turned into a spinning motion, which means the spiraling life principle. The spiral of life of the cosmos, of nature, which the spiral actually would be one of the oldest symbols depicted on It's All About the World. They go back so far that there's no other relics besides that as we find it. It's just everywhere. There's spirals drawn all over rock faces in the world, from all not every continent. And a lot of people in the anthropological school really didn't know exactly what it meant, but they eventually realized it was the Fibonacci sequence, which is kind of a mathematical equation for nature that is pretty much universal and constant. Fibonacci sequence is very interesting. And it's like a mathematical ratio, a perfect ratio of spiraling image. That is pretty much the swastika, if you look at it in that light. It is the male and female force going activity. in what you use to put it down. So the swastika represents cosmic differentiation in equilibrium, all adjacent citizen. So this is now two of the methods, whether narrative form or symbolic of archetypal forces rendered into geometric symbols that encase those ideas. These are two of the main ways they taught information to mystery persons. And each one had a little bit different technique to use when they related. But there was one other way that they engaged in a form of teaching to their initiates, which is very different from the subject. And one that's more popularly known by people today, which is the taking of entheogens, or altered states of consciousness, at the peak of the ritual that they undergo, whether it's a cave or a grove or a temple. They typically would take some sort of hallucinogen that would loosen the expanded consciousness to merge themselves with the cosmic information that they are being revealed and relayed by the adepts that already know this stuff, the neophytes would essentially use this lineage to connect with the adept because their energies aren't quite aligned and they kind of get on this level through hallucinations. And now there's actually some images that show, I think it might be hallucinating mysteries, like an image of hallucinating mysteries somewhere. I forget where, but it shows an adept in the middle in a cave, and there's like little cords, little lines that go out from his body and touch the body of its initiates that are being inducted into the mysteries, the lesser mysteries. And there's a lot of speculation about what these cords are that are attached to them and run back to their adept. And in the light of the taking of hallucinogens to get on this level, and him using his own energy to kind of loosen reality's hold, material reality, on their consciousness to better apprehend what's being relayed and to see beyond the veil, so to speak. He gives them a little bit of aid with his own energy. That's already gone through that. And that's the chords, that's the lines in the picture, the image, connecting to the newly initiated priests, or adepts, whatever you want to call them. And thus, those are the three main methods that were used to teach missions. That does vary across different cultures to a degree. I mean, it's mostly the same thing in different form. And they were very effective in doing what they were designed to do. I mean, the same occult symbols are used all the time today. You just go start looking at logos, companies, major companies, go look at a bank, go look at a financial institution, corporation, go look at Target, which is the second symbol that I have to go to. I circled a dot, which in astrology also is the sun. The sun symbol represents the soul, not our sun. That's its symbol as well. So these things have a multifold uses and meanings, and they're still used today by all sorts of corporations, major ones. And that's not by chance. Because I only say this briefly, the world power elite that are some of the most incredibly rich and privileged and influential families and global international elites. They know this stuff. They've studied this information, and they have steeped themselves in the acculturation to use it pretty much for their own self-care, which is an abuse of that information. And a lot of times they invert it, but they use symbols all the time. They know how they work. They know that, and they use them accordingly. because they know we don't know. Which is why the civilization needs to be known. Because we're at this advantage. The symbols are everywhere, and you ask the person, they're like, that's just a logo. They just thought that was a cool symbol. Well, answer you why they're always the same symbols. Pretty much. They just different forms. Look at the chrome symbol. It's a spiral. Why? It's a reason. It could have just been a seed. It's not. Look at apple. The body of the fruit. The tree of knowledge. Very symbolic. Very ancient. As old as time. As old as the Bible. The first symbol. Or the serpent using its own tail. Or any number of major corporations. Target. They use the same things that have existed since antiquity. Why would we do that? Why would we do it? Because they work. They work on the subconscious. They work on psychology. While we're totally aware of its fact that it does work. It's always worked. It will always work. But as long as most people don't understand it and don't think about it, and have no idea of its real purpose or its underlying meanings that stretch back into our history, we will remain under the domain of subconscious manipulation and occult ignorance, basically. So, these methods and techniques need to be known, which is why they can be known, and explained in a comprehensible, relatable manner that your average intelligent person, not like super educated or super intelligent, but your average intelligent person, can understand, which would at least be a good portion of the narrative, and level playing field. But it's, it's also not just for that, we also need to do this for our own spiritual evolution. We can't just sit in this. We can't, right? And it's not recommended, to be honest. So, the occult mystery tradition is essentially charged with guarding, teaching, and passing down this knowledge of the symbols of the cosmos, of ourselves, through the use of narratives and archetypal and geometric symbols that can relate it, that keep it coded. And, for thousands of years, they never pulled this off until the rise of Christianity, which kind of went nuts and burned a lot of books and destroyed a lot of temples and defaced the symbols and didn't know what they meant, or just basically took them over and said, oh, they really meant what we thought they meant. They mean Jesus was coming, the prophetic, which was not the case. They actually pretty much re-adopted all the same symbols because that was the easy thing to do. You just sit over the community. They basically religiously appropriated pagan occult symbols into Christianity. For example, it's very interesting to know that when they say, I don't know where it said this in the Bible, but the keys to the kingdom were given to Peter. P-E-T-E-R. Well, most people may think that it's the devotee, the disciple of Jesus, Peter. And upon this rock, he would build his church. Well, if you take it literally, you couldn't possibly do that. Check this through, but when you realize that none of these things are ever truly going to be taken literally, and always are shot full of it, training, that's service. As well as the idea of the highest initiative order, and they are also called container, P-T-Y, which, what do you say the Pope is? The Holy of the Keys of Peter, or the Holy of the Keys of the Christian tradition of occultism, but the terror of the Vatican, the terror of current Christianity. The Vatican knows that. They don't tell it common people, but they appropriate the occult mystery keys spawned up in the Vatican everybody else. But Peter is not Peter. Technically, the words that we Peter, which was the highest level of the order of the mystery traditions. And you only find it out by doing some extensive research on cultists and traditions and terminology. So this is kind of a little more detailed than I think of. And let's dig into there. And next time we'll go over, so I guess I wish I would continue today, but we'll do the next podcast, a little bit of the other traditions and start to dive into a little bit more detailed content related to specific aspects of the occult cosmology ourselves, or the different layers of reality. So thank you for joining me today on the second episode of Mystery Books. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informational to the point that you learned something or had something rendered more conceivable when you learned more stuff about this already. And we'll see you next time on this videocast called Mystery Occultism, and I'm Sam Robinson. And thank you, and please subscribe.